Hurd sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and he voted to release that memo. He is also a former CIA officer who served in the Middle East and Asia. Sir, thank you for being here today.
Well, always a pleasure to be on.
So to start off, you voted to release the memo.
I did.
Why, and why do you think it's important that it's out there?
Well, I voted to release the memo because the American public needs to realize that unverified information, circular reporting, and rumors were being used in a Title III court in order to get the approval to spy on Americans. Our civil liberties are important. They are not burdens. Our civil liberties are things that make our country great. And so that is the focus of the memo, of a series of FISA applications on one individual. And so that's why I lean more in the camp with Trey Gowdy about this is not going to have a direct impact on the Mueller investigation. But I think our FISA courts, DOJ officials, folks in the FBI recognize that Congress is going to fulfill its oversight role and duty to shine a light on what's happening.
You know, there's been a lot of controversy about whether the information should have been released, how it was released, if it was politically motivated in its release. And what you're talking about is really kind of a fundamental check and balance in our American democracy. How important is it that what happens before this FISA court is held to a higher standard, even than what we see publicly? I can go into courtrooms, cover trials all the time, but I can't get in and watch what happens there.
We give a lot of power and responsibility to the Department of Justice, to our intelligence communities, to our federal law enforcement. And so they need to exercise that power appropriately. And we got to make sure the leaders of those organizations are crossing every T and dotting every I. This is not, the release of the memo in this conversation is not a rebuke of the rank and file members within the FBI. I had the honor of serving side by side with a number of members in the FBI, and our country is safer today because of the special agents and the folks that work in the FBI. But when it comes to a civilian oversight of our federal law enforcement and our intelligence community, that's a hallmark of this experiment called America. It's interesting, when I travel overseas, even to Europe, many of the parliamentarians there ask us for information about their intelligence organizations because they don't have civilian oversight over those. This is an important, this is an important distinction. And it's also important to remember, yes, the DOJ is separate, kind of separate, let's call it, from the White House, so that the president can't abuse the senior law enforcement. But it's not a wall from civilian oversight, which is Congress, which is our responsibility.
Now that the information is out there, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from that memo?
I think the biggest takeaway from that memo is that we need to make sure that we understand the kinds of information that's being used on a court in order to spy on Americans. I'm a professional intelligence officer. My job was to determine the difference between intelligence and information. And in that process of collecting, information, that information is judged and determined, make sure it's not salacious. And you go through that process. And we shouldn't be using unverified information. We shouldn't be using rumors from other folks. And I don't know what court would use a newspaper article as evidence. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle are going to say, well, there was more information. That doesn't discount the fact that unverified circular reporting and rumors were used.
All right, Congressman Will Hurd, thank you for joining us here today. Perhaps we will see something from the Democrats soon to come. Thank you for joining.